My name's Mark Cooper, and this is my brother Paul Cooper. And we've been working in England making websites for about 2 years. All sorts of websites really, mainly web applications. So not static websites, but websites with loads of different stuff going on, you know, like e-commerce websites and so on. Websites with forums where people can contribute to sites. So what is PageXML? Well, it's a domain-specific language for making web applications. So that's all it does, you know, websites. It hasn't got any other purpose. It has an XML syntax, which means all the code is their XML files. And it has an interpreter, and this runtime is implemented in C# too. So that's quite handy actually, making this kind of language, because you can implement a HTTP handler in C# and then really easily integrate that with IIS. Okay, so why did we do it? Well, I mean, I suppose the real reason is we really like making software. We like experimenting with things, you know. But we've used so many different tools and programming languages, experimented with loads of different things, different databases and so on. And we found that we were using lots and lots of different tools together over and over again. We'd have a lot of boilerplate code all the time. So we thought what we really want to do is have one language where we can put everything we've learned about making websites together. So we can have one place where we can write our code to make our web applications. Okay, so being a domain-specific language, what's great about that is you can, features that you need all the time, you've got right there in your code. You don't have to use separate modules and ISAPI filters and all this stuff. So this is a good example. Friendly URLs in PageXML. And when you've got a page of code and you want to map that to an URL, if you want to do that in a nice way, you normally have to do something called URL rewriting, which you're probably familiar with. If you don't want an URL with lots of horrible stuff on the end of it that people can't work with. So here's an example here of an URL element used in a page.
Yeah, so you can see that you have constant parts of the URL and variable parts, and they're typed. So for example, on this one you've got the URL is news/channel name, which is a string, /page number, which is an int. So then any page that someone visits in the web browser, any URL that matches that will go to this page. So, and you can see here in this part you can do you can limit the URL. So say for example here it's an int. You can say the min value is 1 and the maximum is 99. And there's lots of other stuff you can put in there as well. But basically that's at the top of every single page. You put the URL there. And that makes it extremely easy to lay out sites. You know, you've got the hierarchical URL structure, very easy to do.
That's right. And so you can see here that URLs, they're mapped by this URL element. So it's not as if you've got a file in a directory, something .pagexml, something .php that gets mapped to. It's actually this URL element that does it for you.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Each of those be broken up with like a slash? So it'd be like news slash.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the person would be news/channel name /page number. And you can see actually with this one it's optional. So if someone visited news/the channel name, they didn't put page number, or then it's got a default value of 1.
And so of course you could have all different combinations here of constants and variables, and there's a load more constraints on there like regular expressions and so on and so forth. Right, well we'll start right at the beginning of this language. Something pretty simple, variables. How do you work with them? We've got variable and set variable, which is self-explanatory. And on the variable there you've got a type. And the variables are like most languages. They've got scoping rules. Some of the types have got members, like a string would have .length. And also what's quite useful is you can put constraints on some of the variables. So an example would be, you might say, put an attribute, null equals false. So we're going to say this variable's got to be null. So I should probably mention that in PageXML, any variable, any type can be null. And that's, later on you'll see why. It's mainly because in a database, all values can be null. And most of your data, when you're making a website, a dynamic website, is in a database of some type. And then there's constants and settings, and they're just like to get a constant, you just put constant colon in front of it. They're constant base URL, or you could have constant client certificate.
There's also stuff like constant referrer URL and stuff like that. There's a whole load of constants. And app settings, there's stuff that is in the web config that you can put in there.
So that, I mean, that's a good example of why being domain specific helps, because you've immediately got all the constants to do with being a website, and you've just got this app setting colon, then get something from the web.config to configure application, rather than have a more complicated, longer bit of code where you've got to access a configuration object, import a namespace, and all that stuff. Well, of course, none of that's there. You just have this simple statement.
Yeah, so do you want to mention about the scoping rules?
Yeah, well, the scoping is just the same as a normal language. If you declare a variable and that's useful, then of course you can't access it somewhere else.
The only exception to that is you can put global colon and then the variable name in there.
Yeah, and then you can access it, from anywhere after that. So yeah. Like I said, you're always accessing databases when you make websites. So PageXML has this inline SQL feature. And what it's about is it allows you to just write the SQL that you want, embed your variables in there, without having to escape them and that kind of thing. So you want to talk through this example?
So you can see with this one, on the URL example we had before, there was the second URL part was channel name. So you can see here we're just doing a simple select from the news channel table where the name is channel name. Then here we might have an if statement which just checks to see if that channel exists, because you might want to have a resource not found error or something like that. And then down here we've got another variable which is a type is table, which is selecting all of the rows from the news item table where the channel name, the channel ID rather, is channel.id. Pardon?
Right, so the question is, how does it know what database we're accessing? Right, well, in the web.config you can put in your default database. So you put in your username and password and so on. Now you can also, because when you make a web application, you've got a database you're accessing, 99% of people. So I thought, don't explicitly put that connection in your code. Let's say the first time you use SQL, it will connect, so it doesn't connect to every request. Then when it's finished doing the request, it disconnects. Now you can manually create SQL connections to connect to other databases if you like, or you can not use the implicit database connection if you like as well. But we haven't got time to give you an example of that now.
PageXML knows how to escape variables and correctly for different databases as well. So I mean that's something that could be expanded on in future versions. So at the moment it supports MySQL, PostgreSQL. Yeah,
it's fairly easy for it to support any database. What's good about this is that it protects you from the SQL injection. We all know it's a very common thing to happen in web applications. You concatenate up your SQL string to run. If you're not a very experienced programmer, what happens is you use a string and it's got some SQL in it, and that SQL gets injected into your statement. So I could have select star etc etc, put a semicolon at the end of that and say delete database, right? So that's a huge security flaw. So what PageXML will do, it'll know this channel name, it knows it's a string, so it'll escape it correctly when it builds up this all together and sends it off to the database. Right, PageXML has simple control structures, which you've seen in any language has got. if, while, switch and loop. And in here, when you have an expression, you don't have to use XML elements to create that. You can just put an expression in there with brackets and operators and so on.
Yes, you can see this is just a really simple example where we're just saying if there's no news items, then write out there are no news items, else loop through the the items, and then just output the title and the published. So you can see that each iterator I contains one row from that table variable news items.
Yeah, and there's a handy feature added on that when you loop through. You can loop through all sorts of things, numbers or anything that's, well, internally as it's implemented in C#, anything that's I enumerable. And you see here it's got an extra member added onto it, I.loopIndex. It just tells you how far you are
and
through
there's
the loop.
there's lots of other members as well, like loop begin, loop end, and
yeah, it's just because we're programming these websites. We've been doing it for 2 years, and it's something you always need. Well, I'm not using a for loop, so I haven't got a count. I thought it'd be good if you could just get it immediately without having to write another bit of unnecessary code. Right, functions are kind of are implemented as something called modules in PageXML, and it's where you've got a call element to call modules, and then here there's a module in a another XML file.
yeah, so the point of this is to make it so it's easier to separate design out from the code. So for example, we might have a module that draws an individual news item. So here the call is calling that file, a module, and then it's got a parameter which is the individual news item. So then a module is different from a page in that the root element is module, and then instead of having URL it has params, and then you can see that the parameters for this module are the news item, and then an optional one here I've got here to say like make heading link, which is a bool. So if that was true, then you might in the code here you would like make the link to the news item.
Question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can the parameters be hunts of PageXML code?
Oh, right, so the question was, can the parameters be PageXML code? Yes, they can. Anything you see here, the inner text inside an element, you can put more PageXML in there and make variables in there. So you can make a variable within a variable. And that also leads me on to something quite interesting, which is how you can implement anonymous modules. Now here it says XML resource and it specifies this file. Now this can be, this here wants to accept an XML reader, this what child element part of call. So that could be XML from anywhere. That could be for a database, a string I've made up. It could be some XML elsewhere in the same file. So you can see it's kind of dynamic like that. So it really, this data can come from anywhere, and you can put your any PageXML elements in any kind of expression you've got. Okay, so PageXML also has some collections and some simple operators that you have in any programming language. You can create the collections and put things in them. You've got get, find, add, copy, remove, all. So they're all pretty simple things that you've all seen before.
Yeah, so this example you can see it's just with a list. They're just a series of comma separated strings. It's a list of strings, and then here we've got a map variable which is int string, and then this is, you can see how it's created dynamically. So this map is going to contain the result of this loop here, so we're looping through the result of this SQL statement. So we're selecting all the people and then ordering it by their name, and then in item here this is getting added to the map. So we're putting in the key as i.id and the value as i.name. So you can see that's the int and that's the string.
Yeah, so hopefully you can see that when you've got some variable reference or a literal inside a child element, that is kind of been written into the previous expression. So here this has been written into this sequence, and then this sequence comes into the map. Okay, And also you can see there, as Paul showed, all the collections, their values are typed. So it's a bit like generics or templates that way. And you put them inside the square brackets.
Another quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
You haven't shown it, but I'm curious. I'm assuming you can mix just HTML or XML formatting in with this. So if you wanted to return, instead of ID, comma, name, what if you wanted to return that as a table row in HTML format?
Right, so the question is, can we, or how do we mix HTML, for example, with PageXML? Now, well, any XML in the XML file is processed as PageXML. Now, what you do then, if you've got a bunch of XML or HTML you want to output as a literal, you would stick that, in quotes and put C data around it, so you don't have to escape it. And that's most of that is best shown by examples, which we haven't got time to go through here. But there is a paper we've written which has got loads of stuff in it, which we can print out and give to everyone. Okay.
I'm just curious. It seems like a more intimate interconnection between the XML, HTML, and the PageXML would be useful. You're going to switch back and forth between script and HTML a lot, aren't you?
So the statement there is that it looks like it would be useful to have more integration of PageXML and XML and HTML and so on. And I think that's absolutely right. I think, though, it's important to remember that this being a simple domain-specific language, we don't to keep it simple, we don't want to mix lots of different languages together. And I think this is what this next slide shows. With reading text, and then following this is reading XML. If we've got a bit of design HTML we want to output, it'd be better to have that in an external resource file, and then bring that in and replace different tokens with
so basically we want to try and put the HTML into separate files. So I mean, in this example, you can see how we replace the input is this string. And then you have what and with pairs, which say replace what and then with. So for example, instead in input, you would have something like input resource HTML header.htmlf, and then the what and with, it might be like what page title with, and then you would say like news item or something like that. So the idea we wanted to do was to separate the HTML out. So that's what this example shows, is the replace, being able to put tokens into a file and then replace them with values. Oh. So on like the draw news item thing, like I said, you might have a file called newsitem.htmlf or HTML fragment, and then you might have a table, whatever div or anything HTML, and then you might have like news item title, and then that gets replaced with i.title.
Yeah. So we've got a question over there. So the question is, are we considering implementing a build provider? Can you
like for instance, like with apps or with ASP.NET itself has a built-in build provider that's pointing to the ASP page, understands would understand this and then would run through the process of compilation of this into
right.
a format that would either be targeted for RSS or for.
Right, so these are questions about how we can compile or further develop the language, I suppose. What we've got at the moment is we've got a language design, and we've implemented the interpreter for that. So I'm very interested to hear people's ideas about how you can improve that. So we'll talk about that later. Yes, another question.
Yeah. Also, how do you separate the concerns between presentation, computation, and also possibly the enhancements of that presentation? Like the fact that when you develop web applications, you want to separate the way that you access, transform data, and the way you actually project it to a user. And then possibly after that, separate the parts that permit you to modify that presentation. Like some people use have a computation, spit out XML, and then use XSLT to present it through HTML or like traditional like web architectures and stuff like that?
Yeah.
How does this fit in?
So this is a question about tiers in web applications, presentation versus data and so on. This PageXML is about code. This is outputting a stream of text or binary or both. So you're going to churn out some HTML or some RSS or some XML or whatever. So that's really what PageXML is about. You know, your data's in your database, your processing's in your PageXML, and your output is HTML, which is of course actually drawn by the client's browser. So yeah, this slide's about reading XML. PageXML, you work with XML a lot. I certainly do, like getting processing RSS feeds from other sites, for example. So PageXML has an API built in for reading XML, which kind of makes it more convenient and more relevant. And there's a difference between like what I call a logical versus a physical representation of XML. And PageXML has a more logical XML reader. It's a forward reader, so you don't have an access to a DOM. And it's like a simple example of that is if you've got an open element followed by a closed element, and then imagine you've got a closed element. Now in PageXML, they're both read as the same thing, open, close. But you've probably seen, working with system.xml, you know, those two things, two bits of XML, even though they're kind of logically the same, you have to put an if statement to deal with them. And one of my aims is to remove a lot of ifs and a lot of boilerplate code you might have normally. And then you can see there you've got elements like, you know, read element, read text, and so on, and get information about the node. And we haven't got time to go through this, but and in the paper there's examples of all of this, and you can see how you would actually start to use, you know, external XML within PageXML code. Right, so we've done, like I say, we've been working on websites for 2 years, and all our sites we've got working at the moment, they're all actually implemented in PageXML. So we've got, our prototype is kind of a working prototype. It's very robust. There's like this site, JWS Merchandising. He's an eBay seller, and he's got a site of his own separate from eBay. And so his site is implemented in PageXML. And you can visit that, and you can see it's you know, it's a simple site, but it's got the e-commerce and everything there, and it shows that it's very robust. I mean, he's, you know, tens of thousands of sales, a big turnover, and so it kind of shows that the PageXML is worked well. Basically, it's worked in a practical environment.
Yeah, and right from the first version of PageXML, which is very basic, we did our own personal websites in it. And then over time, we've slowly added more and more features until where now we think it's got, you know, it does quite a lot. It's pretty comprehensive. So yeah, there's plenty of other stuff here that we haven't really got time to go over. Some of the most important things are to do with caching, because, you know, it's domain-specific language. We want to make stuff like caching really easy. So with caching, for example, you just have an element called cache on server, and it's just a bool, so you just put cache on server true, and then that means that page is going to be cached on the server, and so on. So the aim is to make things like that extremely easy to do.
And you've got other things like elements to do with forms. You know, creating a form. This creates a form, and the paper has got examples of all of this. Create a form, add different fields to it, and you want all the validation and stuff to kind of be done for you. Process the form and say, well, did it work? What went wrong? Like kind of what you used to like in when you drag and drop something in ASP.NET. You don't want to write loads of code to deal with different query strings and all that sort of business. And there's other stuff like you know, conversion, you know, encoding, and over there's things for, you know, HTTP requests, sending email. You've got logging, error handling, and stuff. Like as I say, it's quite this. I mean, it is a prototype. I suppose it's kind of a beta, but it's quite well developed. You know, it's got the multi-threading in there, and a load of error handling and all that.
Okay, so we've finished our time, but we could just mention some of the stuff for us to do in the future. I mean, at the moment, no one's heard of this language. We haven't made it public at all, because number one reason is the reference is only like 20 or 30% done. So we know that we have to have a complete reference website and stuff like that before we even think about making it available.
That's right. So you've got these reference documentation, but also has been covered by a previous speaker, the actual language specification. We need to get that all done. Set up this PageXML net website, and as it's XML, thing that we're looking forward to doing is the XSD XML schema for the language. And then we can put that into Visual Studio, and then we'll get all IntelliSense coming up. So when we make PageXML, it'll pop up in a box and tell us what elements we can type in. And then we've got to decide, are we going to do a next version? How are we going to get investment? Are we going to release it and that sort of kind of thing? So we're kind of using it ourselves to make websites, really. And the next stage of this, getting everyone else to use it, that's where we're at now. So that's the status of the PageXML project.
So, I mean, we haven't had time to go through everything, but you can get a rough idea of how the language works. And if you want to find out more about it, you can talk to us or, get a copy of our paper to read through. So, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it.